The settlement of New Haven was never meant for human eyes. Its sharp-edged structures jutting against the burnt orange sky like the ribs of some alien beast, each spire catching the light of 3 setting suns until the entire marketplace bled with shifting shadows. Jaden moved through it like a ghost, head down, shoulders hunched beneath a battered pack that held little more than scraps. At 18, his lean frame bore the marks of too many hungry nights and too many days running from trouble. But there was a strength in him that refused to die. His sun-bleached hair clung damply to his forehead as he crouched near a vendor's stall, eyes flicking to the mottled green guard posted nearby. The Viceroy's 4 arms were crossed, his double-pupiled eyes narrowing at Jaden with the familiar disdain of a species that viewed humanity as little, more than refuse left behind after the mines dried up. "Move along, human," the guard growled, but Jaden only nodded, slipping away in practiced silence, one hand closing over a bruised piece of fruit from the vendor's display. It wasn't charity new. Haven had none for his kind. It was survival. And survival didn't wait for permission. He retreated toward the foothills, eating as he went. But his instincts soon picked up a disturbance that drew him off his normal path. A cluster of Vexery security forces gathered at the eastern ridge, their weapons humming faintly with the menace of a patrol on alert. Curiosity tugged at him, dangerous and irresistible. Keeping low, he circled through scrub and stone until he reached a vantage point above the commotion. What he saw made his breath catch. Stumbling down the rocky slope was a figure unlike any of the thick-limbed Vexery. This one was lithe, graceful even in pain, her skin a sky-blue glow in the fading light, her silver hair tangled, constreaked with dirt. A Neridian. He had heard their name whispered with awe and fear. The rivals who matched the Vexery in power might outstrip them in elegance and technology. She collapsed against a jagged outcropping, pressing one hand to her side where a dark stain spread across her torn combat suit. "Neridian spy!" A Vexery shouted, and the guards surged forward, weapons raised. Every instinct told Jaden to turn back, to vanish into the mountains, and let the world devour itself without him. But something deeper overrode survival. He moved, a shadow through the rocks, circling wide until he slipped behind the outcropping where the girl struggled to catch her breath. Her eyes shot up as he whispered, "Don't scream." They were vivid blue, sharp even through pain, and they locked on him with suspicion as her hand twitched toward a weapon at her hip. Jaden raised both hands. "I'm not with them," he said, his voice low, steady despite his racing pulse. "But they'll find you if you stay here." For a heartbeat she studied him, distrust battling desperation. "Why help me, human?" She hissed, her words accented but fluent. Jaden gave a small shrug. "Good question. Maybe I'm just tired of watching the Vexery get their way." He extended his hand, palm open, the gesture absurd even to himself. The voices of the guards drew closer, their search methodical. "My name's Jaden," he offered. For a long, perilous moment, the Neridian stared at his hand. Then she reached out, gripping his with surprising strength. "Lavanna," she said, her tone edged with warning. "Betray me, and it will be your last mistake." Despite the danger, Jaden's mouth quirked into a smile. "Fair enough." Together they slipped into the growing dark, moving along the treacherous mountain path that twisted like a serpent into the high ridges beyond New Haven. Stones rattled underfoot, each step threatening to betray their flight. But Jaden knew these trails better than he knew the lines of his own palm. As the suns dipped behind the horizon and the first of the moons rose silver against the sky, he realized that with one reckless choice extending his hand to a wounded stranger, he had crossed a threshold. Whatever lay ahead with this Neridian girl, it was bigger than survival, bigger than stolen fruit or crumbling shelters. It was the beginning of something that would change him, and perhaps this entire world, forever. The mountains rose around them in jagged silhouettes, their peaks catching the silver wash of 3 moons as night deepened, and Jaden felt the weight of every shadow pressing in on them as he guided Lavanna along a narrow ledge. Her breath came ragged, though she tried to mask it, one hand never straying far from the blade at her hip. But Jaden could see the way her steps faltered, the way she leaned against the stone more than she wanted to admit. When they reached a plateau no wider than a marketplace stall, he stopped, planting his pack down firmly. "We rest here," he said, scanning the horizon where the Vexery patrol lights burned faintly in the distance. Lavanna shook her head, stubborn pride flashing in her eyes. "It is a flesh wound," she insisted, though blood glistened weightly between her fingers. Jaden crouched before her, pulling free the scavenged scraps of cloth and a half-empty tube of antiseptic gel he had stolen months ago. "That's a lot of flesh," he said dryly. Her eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with exhaustion. "Why do you care?" she demanded, but he met her gaze without flinching. "Because someone should." She hesitated, then unzipped her suit enough to reveal the gash along her ribs, the skin glowing faintly in the moonlight, silver-blue blood seeping in rhythmic pulses. Jaden cleaned it with practiced care, ignoring the sting of her grip as she clamped onto his wrist when the gel touched raw tissue. "Easy," he murmured, steadying his hands. "I've patched myself up 100 times. Watched Vexery doctors when I could, stole texts I couldn't read, but memorized anyway. Survival's a teacher." For a moment, their eyes locked, her grip tightening. Then she released him slowly, as if conceding something unspoken. "You have gentle hands," she said, her voice low, almost grudging. Jaden only shrugged, wrapping the bandage firmly. "Gentle hands don't keep you alive out here. Knowing when to fight does." She let out a short laugh that dissolved into a hiss of pain. "Perhaps you're not as fragile as humans are said to be." The air grew colder as the night pressed down. A sound like gravel tumbling echoed from the ridge above, and Jaden's hand snapped toward a rock shard, sharp enough to serve as a weapon. Lavanna stiffened, her blade already out, eyes fixed on the darkness. A low growl rolled through the canyon, deep and resonant enough to make Jaden's chest vibrate. "Mountain stalker," he whispered. "Big, 6 eyes. Hunts by scent." The noise came again, closer now, claws scraping against stone. Jaden pulled her toward the shadow of a boulder, heart pounding. The creature emerged at the cave mouth they had hoped to use as shelter, massive shoulders hunched beneath scales that shifted color with the stone, its amber eyes glowing like twin lanterns as saliva dripped from jagged teeth. It sniffed, searching for blood, and Lavanna's wound was too fresh, the scent too strong. "Don't move," Jaden breathed, every muscle taut. The stalker stepped into the plateau, its bulk nearly filling the space. It lowered its head, ears flicking as it honed in on the faint sound of Lavanna's breathing. She leaned close, her voice a whisper of steel. "We cannot stay still forever." Jaden's mind raced, instinct clawing for a plan. "There's a narrow passage at the back of that cave," he murmured. "Too small for it to follow. On my mark, we move." Her eyes gleamed, sharp and fearless. "Then give the mark." The stalker shifted, muscles tensing for a pounce. Jaden hurled a rock, striking one of its eyes. The beast roared, thrashing, and in that moment they split, Jaden to the left, Lavanna darting right with impossible speed despite her injury. But instead of retreating, she struck, her blade flashing across its flank. The stalker howled, tail lashing, and Jaden was slammed into the cave wall, ribs ablaze with pain. He staggered to his feet, vision swimming, as Lavanna danced with the predator, her movements sharp and calculated, but growing slower as her wound bled afresh. Jaden's gaze locked on a fallen stalactite, long and spear-like. Seizing it, he charged as the stalker lunged for Lavanna. "Over here!" He roared, and when the beast turned, He drove the jagged stone upward into the soft flesh beneath its throat. Hot blood sprayed across his arms as the stalker convulsed, its death throes shaking the ground before it collapsed with a final gurgling roar. Silence fell, broken only by their labored breaths. Jaden dropped the spear, stumbling toward Lavanna. She leaned against the wall, blood seeping through the bandage, but her blade still in hand. "Not bad for a scavenger," she rasped. He managed a grin, despite the ache in his chest. "And not bad for a spy." Their eyes held, exhaustion and adrenaline binding them more tightly than any oath. She reached out, her fingers brushing his hand with unexpected softness. "In my people's tongue, this moment has a name," she whispered. "Teshvin." A bond forged in danger, unbreakable. Jaden felt the weight of her words settle into him, heavier than the mountains themselves. "Then I guess we're bound," he said quietly. And as the moonlight spilled across the carcass of the beast, Jaden knew that something had shifted, that his life had just been tied to hers, and the path ahead would be far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. Dawn broke with a pale lavender glow, spilling across the jagged ridges, the air sharp with the scent of stone and cold earth, and Jaden stirred from a half-sleep that had been broken by memories of claws and blood. Lavanna lay nearby, her breathing steadier now, her wound bound tightly beneath strips of cloth that carried faint stains of silver blue. The raiders surged forward, bikes darting through the gap in suppressive fire. Lavanna pulled Jaden back onto her bike, and together they shot down the ravine toward a series of caves Jaden had once used as shelter. The Vexery scrambled to regroup, but the advantage was lost. Within moments, the Neridians had taken the high ground of the caves, their sleek armor blending with the shadows as they laid down controlled cover fire. Jaden crouched with Lavanna in the largest chamber, chest heaving from the adrenaline, the echoes of battle still ringing. Her vivid eyes shone in the dim light, fixed on him. "You turned the tide," she said, voice low but edged with something like pride. No Neridian would have thought to twist their own weapons against them. Jaden swallowed, suddenly aware of the heat between them, of the awe in her gaze. "Human adaptability," he said simply, though his voice shook. "It's the only reason I'm still alive." Commander Turan entered then, his imposing figure filling the cave entrance. His gaze swept the warriors, then fell on Jaden. For the first time, his head inclined slightly in respect. "Your strategy saved lives today," he said. "Perhaps this Teshvin bond has more weight than I imagined." And in that moment, surrounded by alien warriors in a cave carved by storms, Jaden realized he had crossed another threshold, not just Lavanna's rescuer, not just her bond, but now a man who had earned the regard of Neridia's most hardened commander. The path ahead was dangerous, but for the first time, it felt like his. The Badlands gave way gradually, the harsh purple ravines softening into rolling plateaus streaked with crystalline veins that shimmered beneath the suns, until finally the landscape opened to reveal the first glimpse of Neridian territory. Jaden had thought nothing could outshine the alien beauty of the mountains, or the haunting glow of Lavanna's skin under moonlight, but when the living crystal city rose on the horizon, he forgot to breathe. Towers of translucent stone climbed skyward like frozen fire, refracting dawn's light into cascades of color that rippled across the valley, painting the air with shifting reds, blues, and golds. The raiders slowed as they approached, their formation tightening with the discipline of soldiers entering sacred ground. Jaden, clinging to Lavanna's waist, felt the awe in the rhythm of her breathing, the way her posture straightened as the city came into view. "You're home," he murmured over the wind, and she turned her head just enough for him to catch the faint smile at the corner of her lips. "Our heart," she corrected softly, though the words seemed to carry a weight of expectation. The outpost was a fortress of crystal carved into the side of a canyon, glowing faintly as though alive. The raiders dismounted, boots striking stone in unison, And Jaden found himself suddenly small, his tattered clothes and scavenger's pack grotesque against the gleam of Neridian armor. Whispers stirred among the warriors stationed there, their double-pupiled eyes raking over him with skepticism, some with outright disdain. He felt their judgment like heat on his skin. But when one soldier muttered a sharp phrase Jaden couldn't understand, Levana's voice cut the air like a blade. She stepped forward, her chin high, and declared in a tone that carried across the chamber, "He is bound to me by Teshvan." The words fell into silence, every gaze snapping to her, then to Jaden. The weight of it nearly buckled his knees. He forced himself to meet their eyes, to stand straight despite the tremor in his chest. Commander Taran broke the tension, his scarred face impassive as he raised a hand. "The bond is sacred. It will be honored." The others shifted reluctantly, but obedience was clear. Taran's gaze fell on Jaden. "Come." The war room lay within a chamber of crystal that pulsed faintly with inner light, its walls projecting shifting maps of contested territory. Here, Jaden listened as Levana debriefed, her voice steady despite the bandage still wrapped around her side. She spoke of vexery patrols, of new weapon placements along the ridges, and of fractures within the enemy's command. "Some of their generals call for endless war," she explained. "Others whisper of the cost, of shortages, of unrest." Her eyes flicked to Jaden as she added, "They fear adaptability. They fear unpredictability. They fear him." Jaden stiffened under the scrutiny of every commander in the room, but instead of shrinking, he forced himself to step forward, pointing to the map's glowing rivers of energy. "These are supply lines," he said, his voice finding strength as he traced routes he'd memorized from years of scavenging. "They're stretched thin. The more they press, the weaker their grip becomes. It's only a matter of time before those fractures break open." Murmurs filled the chamber. Some scoffed, others nodded. Taran's scarred mouth curved in the faintest of smiles. "Not bad," he said, his tone carrying both approval and warning. When the meeting ended, Jaden stood apart, staring at the crystalline city through a narrow balcony. It glowed brighter as the suns climbed, colors dancing across the stone like fire trapped in ice. Levana found him there, her hand brushing his as she leaned against the railing. "They doubt you now," she said quietly, "but they will learn. You've already changed more than you know." He looked at her, at the way the light refracted in her silver hair, at the determination etched into her every line. "I don't want to change them," he admitted. "I just wanted to survive." She smiled then, faint and fierce, slipping her fingers fully into his. "Then survive with me. That is what Teshvan means." For the first time, Jaden let himself believe the bond was more than circumstance, more than survival. It was a doorway to something larger, something terrifying, and something worth risking everything for. And as the crystalline towers sang with the morning light, Jaden realized he had taken his first step from the shadows of New Haven into the fire of destiny. 3 years later, Jaden stood at the highest chamber of the Neridian stronghold, his reflection fractured in the crystalline walls that displayed tactical maps and shifting glyphs of the war. He hardly recognized the man staring back at him. The boy who once scavenged scraps in New Haven was gone, replaced by a tall, broad-shouldered advisor with the lean muscle of years of training, his hair cut in Neridian style, save for a single braid adorned with beads, marking survival, honor, and the bond of Teshvan. He carried himself differently now, not as prey avoiding notice, but as someone who had earned the regard of warriors older and stronger than he. Yet beneath the armor and titles, a part of him still felt like the boy at the edge of every fire, watching others belong. Commander Taran entered the chamber, his scarred face harder now, but his eyes sharp with the same commanding presence as the day Jaden first met him. "Jaden," he said, his voice low, carrying urgency, "we've lost contact with Levana's unit. Reports indicate she was taken." The word struck like a blade. Jaden's chest constricted, but he forced his voice to remain calm. When? Taran stepped closer, activating a map that revealed a fortified Vexery outpost near the contested border, its walls glowing with power signatures. 6 hours ago. We intercepted comms. They intend to interrogate her before transferring her to Central. Detention. The room spun with possibilities, each worse than the last. Lavanna, whose hand had steadied him through training, whose voice had defied council doubt, whose laugh had warmed even the most brutal nights, was in Vexery chains. Jaden studied the projection, his mind already calculating. A direct assault would be suicide, one commander muttered. The outpost is heavily shielded, with sensor nets across every approach. Jaden's gaze narrowed. Then we don't attack it, he said, fingers dancing across the crystalline console. We make them evacuate it. The commanders exchanged glances, but Taran's eyes stayed on Jaden, waiting. Jaden highlighted 3 glowing nodes along the outpost's power grid. The Vexery reactors run on unstable conduits. If we introduce a cascading surge at these junctions, the system will read it as a catastrophic failure. Evacuation protocols will trigger automatically. They'll think it's about to go critical. A commander frowned. Even if they abandon it, how do we infiltrate in time? Jaden's voice hardened. Because I know their evacuations. I've seen them. They'll prioritize command logs and weapons before prisoners. That gives us a window. He turned to Taran. Send a small team. I'll lead it. Taran's scar twisted faintly as though resisting a smile. Of course you will. The bond makes it your duty. Then softer, so only Jaden heard. And you're right. The plan unfolded with precision. A magnetic storm rumbled across the Badlands, hiding their approach as Neridian engineers seeded the junctions with pulse charges calibrated to Jaden's specifications. When the surge began, alarms blared through the Vexery outpost, red lights flashing as personnel scrambled to escape what they believed was an imminent reactor failure. Amid the chaos, Jaden and his strike team slipped through service corridors, every step guided by years of studying Vexery designs, every corner turned with his heart hammering for Lavanna. They found her in a reinforced cell, bruised but unbroken, already working on dismantling the lock with stolen fragments of metal. Her eyes widened when the door slid open, relief cracking through her defiant mask. "You're late," she rasped, her voice still carrying the dry humor that had always cut through the dark. "Traffic was terrible," Jaden replied, pulling her to her feet. Their eyes locked, everything unspoken flooding between them. The extraction was swift, their escape masked by the panic of fleeing guards. By the time the Vexery realized the reactor was stable, the Neridian team was already gone, slipping beyond sensor range into the safety of crystalline spires. That night, in quarters where Neridian technology blended with the small human artifacts, Jaden had kept remnants of a life long past Lavanna rested against him, her silver hair loose across his chest, her voice hushed. "The intel I gathered, it confirms what we suspected. The Vexery leadership is fracturing. Moderates gaining ground, tired of endless war. They fear collapse." Jaden traced his fingers through her hair, the weight of her words sinking like stone. "Then peace is possible." She lifted her head, studying him with those piercing blue eyes that once met him on a bloodied mountainside. "The Council thinks so. They want you to help draft the overture." He blinked, stunned. "Me? I'm no diplomat," she smiled, tired but luminous. "No, you're something rarer. A bridge. Human adaptability with Neridian discipline. You understand both sides. That's what they need." Silence lingered as the crystalline walls refracted the soft glow of moons rising. Jaden tightened his arm around her, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Whatever comes, we face it together." She pressed her forehead to his, whispering the word that had bound them years ago in a mountain cave. "Teshvin." He breathed it back, their voices merging in the hush of the chamber. And as the crystalline city blazed with colors outside, Jaden realized the final transformation was complete. The orphan who once stole fruit to survive was now a man with purpose, a warrior, a partner, and perhaps the first step toward a peace that could change the stars themselves. The council chamber was alive with color, shafts of refracted sunlight turning the crystalline walls into living fire, as Neridian elders debated in voices that carried both weight and weariness. Jaden stood beside Lavanna near the central dais, his pulse steady despite the eyes of half a dozen counselors fixed on him, measuring, doubting, dissecting every gesture. He had stood in these halls before, as an outsider tolerated only because of Lavanna's defiance and Tehran's command, but now he stood as more a recognized bondmate under Teshvin, a tactical advisor who had saved lives, and if the council chose to see it, a bridge between worlds. The debates swirled around him. Some argued for striking the vexery while they fractured, to shatter their defenses once and for all. Others spoke of opportunity, of treaties and fragile hope. When at last the chamber fell into silence, the High Counselor's gaze turned to Jaden, her crystalline crown catching the light until it burned white. "You have lived among our enemies," she said slowly. "You have walked as prey in their shadow, survived where no Neridian could. Tell us, why should we trust peace when war has defined us for generations?" The weight of history pressed against him, but Jaden did not flinch. He remembered the marketplace sneers of New Haven, the stink of vexery rations stolen in the dark, the hopeless eyes of other abandoned humans who had not endured. He thought of Lavanna's blood on his hands, the mountain stalker's roar in the cave, the 30 riders encircling him at dawn, and the bond that had carried him through. His voice carried across the chamber, not with polished eloquence, but with the grit of survival. "Because war is a cage," he said. "I have lived in it every day since I was left behind. I know what endless struggle feels like, and I know what happens when you refuse to see another way. The vexery fear us humans, Neridians, because we adapt. They fracture because they cannot. If you end this war with blood, another will rise. But if you seize this chance to make them see us as more than enemies, you break the cycle forever." Murmurs rippled, counselors leaning toward one another, arguments reigniting, but the High Counselor did not look away from him. Later, as the chamber emptied and the weight of decision shifted to back corridors and private councils, Jaden stood on a balcony with Lavanna at his side. The crystalline towers blazed with the light of 3 suns dipping toward the horizon, their colors bleeding into one another until the entire city seemed to pulse like a living heart. She leaned into him, her silver hair brushing his jaw, her hand finding his with a quiet certainty. "You've unsettled them," she murmured, a hint of pride in her tone. "That was never my gift," Jaden said with a faint smile. "Survival doesn't teach speeches. It teaches grit." She tilted her head, eyes glowing in the fading light. And yet they listened. He exhaled slowly, the enormity of it pressing in. "What if I'm wrong? What if peace isn't possible?" Lavanna squeezed his hand, her voice fierce. "Then we fight. But we fight together. That is what Teshvin means." A messenger appeared at the doorway, then, bowing low. "The council has reached consensus," he announced, his voice taut with significance. "A delegation will be sent to the vexery moderates. Jaden of Earth, you are named envoy to walk between both peoples." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Jaden felt the weight of them settle on his shoulders, heavy as stone yet burning with strange exhilaration. Envoy. Not scavenger, not orphan, not even just warrior envoy. A bridge. He looked to Lavanna, and she met his gaze with the same fire she had carried into the mountains the day they met, the same unyielding resolve that had bound them in the cave. "Looks like survival just got a lot more complicated," he whispered. She smiled, fierce and certain. "Good. Complicated is where change begins. That night, as 3 moons rose to crown the crystalline spires, Jaden lay awake, the city humming faintly with energy around him. He thought of the abandoned boy in New Haven, who once stole fruit to quiet his hunger, the boy who thought belonging was a lie. Now, as the Neridian city glowed with light and the bond of Teshvan pulsed warm through his veins, he realized the final truth. He was not a shadow anymore. He was part of something larger, something alive. And as envoy, he would carry not just his own survival, but the fragile hope of 2 peoples into the uncertain dawn. The orphan boy who once reached out his hand to a wounded stranger was gone. In his place stood a man who had found purpose, belonging, and a love fierce enough to challenge the stars themselves.